People have been lied to and they're over it. They want to know, what am I getting and what is the outcome going to be? Because I am done with this fear-based marketing and people are really starting to see through it.
Hello, I'm Kristin Constable, and welcome to the Soulful CEO Path, the podcast for purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are building wildly abundant and aligned businesses that create ripple effects of positivity in the world. And this show isn't about cookie-cutter tactics or surface-level strategies. Here, we dive into meaningful conversations that empower you to grow as a business owner and as a human. So, in setting up today's introduction, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory about why she is here with us today. So, since starting this podcast back in May of 2024, on average, I would say I get about 10 podcast pitches a week, meaning about 10 people reach out to me asking if they can be a guest on the show, which is awesome. But the problem is, I only release an episode every 2 weeks, and every other episode is a guest episode. So, I'm really only working with about 12 guest spots a year. And with only 12 guest spots, I typically want to make sure that those people I either have a connection with, or I'm usually reaching out to them to be like, would you like to come on the show? I want you to share your magic. But our guest today is an exception. Sam sent me a pitch that got my attention. It cut through the noise. And of all the, to be honest, pretty bad pitches I get sent, and just in a few sentences of her email, I knew I wanted to bring her on as a guest because clearly she was walking her talk, and I think we can learn a lot from her. So today, our guest is Sam. Sam is a copywriter and founder of Nomad Copy, where she helps you write copy that sounds like you, but converts better. Through her Done For You membership and Done For You VIP days, every business she writes for gets custom copy that is meant to make you money. So with all of that, let's dive in. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kristin. Thank you. That was such a good intro. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was fun. It's all true. I very rarely have guests on here that I haven't had some connection with beforehand, but your email was like, oh, it was like a breath of fresh air. I'm like, this is different. So I'm super excited to dive into copy and copywriting with you today, and creating this copy that sounds awesome but also creates the results that we're looking for. So maybe why don't we start with a question that can context what a lot of people are getting wrong when it comes to copy. So what are some of the big mistakes you're seeing personal brands make when it comes to copy, and why?
There's a lot there. I'd say the most common mistakes that I see are, one, making it about you and not the reader. I see people being really long-winded and people aiming for clever over clear in their copy. With all of those, there's some really simple solutions in there as far as just small rephrasings and such that we can dive into. But ultimately, we see it being me, 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 and look at what I can do and look at my solutions versus what if we just really clearly laid out how we can change your life.
I love that. I think that that's if we even just double click on that one piece, that because you shared three different, I think, pieces in there, but just that one piece around centering the ideal client versus yourself, it can have such a big impact. And I think one of the things that, comes up when I work with clients around this is that in order to do that, you really have to understand your ideal client first. So it's if we don't know that, it becomes kind of tricky to be able to do that. But that's where that work is really important, because then, we can do that. And I was reading the Winning the Story Wars. Have you ever read that before?
No, I haven't read this one yet.
It's by, what's his name? His name is Jonas something. Anyways, he talks about the hero's journey and how to use that in copywriting and all of that. And what he shares is that the brand is actually the mentor in the hero's journey, and the hero is the client. So it's exactly kind of what you're talking about there. And that's where people kind of get that wrong. I think they put themselves as the hero versus their ideal client.
Yeah, absolutely. In the most respectful way possible. Your clients don't care about you. They care about themselves. And, yes, they care about you and all of that. But, realistically, they're not here to make you money and so that you can get the transformation that you provide. They're there so that they can receive that. And so when you position yourself as, I think in story brands, they call it the guide rather than the mentor, but same is
right.
How can you impact them? Not
Mm-hmm.
why are you great at what you do?
So, one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I started looking at your work and your website was that you had kind of this, I don't know if you call it this, but it was kind of this like ethical empowerment kind of like marketing in the sense of like coming from a really mission and values driven place. Can you share a little bit more about your take on copy and marketing and how you kind of approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in sales. There's a lot of copywriters who come from a more creative background, which is also great. There's a place for all of us in the world. But that's what makes me different is that I come at it from a copy is there to make you money. It is there to drive relationships. The difference being that content versus copy, content is there to nurture, content is there to it's really made for computers. When you think about the traditional sense of content, that's going to be things like blog posts, podcast descriptions, things like that. So when we look at the contrast between those two, copy versus content, if content, is made for computers and being searchable and for nurturing once a computer finds it, typically, then copy is there to sell. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we often don't go into business for ourselves to sell. We go into business for ourselves to drive an impact. A lot of times we take what somebody used to be paying us for because we know we can do it better and that our clients deserve better. And we go out into the world to offer it. And then we actually have to sell. And that's where sales can start feeling kind of icky and it feels really like stretchy and spiky and all of these different things. So when it comes to the ethics of it, a lot of times because it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel good to us, the inclination is to then start digging into people's problems and start selling from the stick versus the carrot, if you know that analogy. So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to ethical sales, it really just comes down to do you believe that you are the best person to deliver what people need? And how can you help them
Mm-hmm.
see what's in front of them, not what they're running from?
Maybe can you elaborate for those of you that people listening that may not be familiar with the stick versus the carrot analogies, just so we can land that home because
Yes.
it's an important
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. So I think the animal in the analogy is a rabbit, and basically they've
Right.
got like if you can picture the collar around their neck with a stick that goes over their head with like a carrot dangling in front of them, so they're incentivized to run
Mm-hmm.
after the carrot. But if they didn't have that, what would get them to run would be somebody behind them with a stick threatening to hit them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's are you running from the hurt or are you running towards the potential?
And I've been seeing this come up a lot more, and people are starting to talk about this even just this year around how the belief is that people are kind of like tuned out or numb to this like scarcity like stick kind of
Hmm.
marketing where we're always being made to feel like we're missing out on something or there's only so much space and we're deficient if we don't do the thing that they're telling you to do. And like although that can work, it's when we're inundated with those messages, we start to get a bit jaded because of that whole thing. So do you see that there's like a shift in how people are buying when it comes to the shift from the stick versus the
Yeah,
carrot?
yeah, I do. And sales psychology and positive psychology will tell us that people want the carrot. That is the part of the brain that lights up and says, this is exactly what I want. You know, we just had the Super Bowl shortly before recording this. So if you go back and watch any of those advertisements, it's not, do you want to not be an idiot that doesn't know any languages? It's the Duolingo ad saying, do you want to be the smartest person in the room? You know, that's what people want. I recently bought a Roomba vacuum, not because I don't ever want to vacuum again, because I know I'll have to vacuum again, but it's the potential of how much time is this going to save me if I'm not vacuuming every day. So psychology tells us that, and current events are that, especially in the online space and especially in the coaching space, unfortunately, people have been lied to and they're over it. They want to know, what am I getting and what is the outcome going to be? Because I am
Yeah.
done with this fear-based marketing and people are really starting to see through it.
And for most people who are listening to this show, I mean, I would say a majority of my audience is very values driven, very impact driven. And so I think this approach will align a lot better than you have to use scarcity in order to sell. You have to, hit on people's pain points in order to get them to really feel. So when we're talking about that, I think for most people that are listening, they're going to be like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I'd be like curious to explore that. Why don't we dive into some more specifics around like, okay, that sounds good, but how do we actually do that? And how do we actually create copy that converts from a place that feels aligned, but like, yeah, that also converts and also works?
Yeah. And you bring up a good point with like the pain points in that, because we do need to know what our people are struggling with. But a lot of times, what I see go wrong on sales pages, this kind of goes back to your first question too, is like as entrepreneurs tend to spend a lot of time understanding people's pain points, which is great. We do need to do a lot of voice of client research and understand them and understand what's motivating them and what they want to move away from. But just because we spend all of that time finding that information doesn't mean that they need to spend all of their time on your sales page and in your sales emails being reminded of their problems. So when we can acknowledge their problems, but then tie those problems to a solution, whether, like I said, on a sales page or in emails, we're going to be much more impactful. We're going to sell more, and we're going to connect again with the pleasure centers in the brain where people are not connecting you and unconsciously connecting you with their problems, but beginning to connect you as synonymous with their solution, their potential, their future.
Okay, this is so good because I have had in my business since 2016. Copywriting and messaging has been something I've just like picked up along the way because me, like many people, we just have to learn how to do it. It's not something that was part of the skill set coming into being a business owner. And I've noticed a few things is that when I have focused on things like you don't have clients, you want more clients, you need more clients, I get clients who are stuck in those things. My experience is that the like quality of client that ends up coming my way is not the same as when I can understand that that's what people want, but then paint a picture for how to bridge that gap. The people end up being more solution oriented, action oriented, like actually not just saying they want to solve the problem, but actually doing the things that they need to do to solve the problem. So I think you're kind of speaking to what the gap there
Yes.
is. If you're just hanging out in pain point area, you're just going to get people who want to hang out there
Mm-hmm.
versus attracting the clients who actually want the solution. Would you say that that's right from a
Yeah.
psychology
Yep.
perspective?
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about that then. If we're thinking about painting that picture for a solution, creating that copy that converts, how do we actually do that?
So the first step is to understand the problems. What I always tell people is like
Mm-hmm.
take a piece of paper and fold it into thirds, like you're going to mail a letter. And then, so we've got three
Mm-hmm.
columns. Column one, problems. So we might say that this person is tired all the time. They feel like they can't get ahead in their work. Where does this problem come from? It's because they're balancing a gym routine because they have fitness goals, they're balancing a new relationship, they're balancing actually doing their work, and they have aspirations in their business. They want to start a podcast. So they feel like they just can't get ahead, and these are all the reasons why. Great. So, second column is solutions. And this is the tricky one because we're not listing the solutions that you offer. We're listing the potential solutions to all of this, right? So maybe the solutions are outsource your podcast. Maybe the solutions are delegate out some other things. Maybe the solutions are to stop paying attention to your fitness routine because you don't need to be going to the gym 4 hours a day. So we've got all these different solutions. We look at then those solutions, circle the ones that you solve, the ones that you can accomplish. You're not a babysitter, so you're not going to take childcare off their hands, but you can help them outsource their podcast. Great. That is what you do. So now we understand the problem and the solution is that they can't seem to get ahead in business. They want to start a podcast. They just don't have the time. Great. Then third column is transformation. We take that single solution that you are going to be the person that they outsource their podcast to. What happens when they've outsourced their podcast? You're going to get more leads naturally in their business. You're going to have more time on your hands to do other things that are revenue generating, like take care of the leads that are coming in from the podcast. You're going to feel really freaking accomplished because your name is going to be out there. You're going to be published. You're going to have all of these opportunities, right? So this is the transformation of what happens after they've worked with you, is what that third column becomes in this transformation column. So that is the part that you speak to in your copy, because we're implying back to that first column. We're implying that you are so stinking busy that you don't have time to do projects that move your business forward, like start a podcast. But once you've worked with us to start your podcast, you're going to all of the things I just mentioned, right? You're going to have new leads, you're going to have more time, you're going to have more publicity, etc. So those are the points that you speak to after acknowledging their problem. Ultimately, the key here is that the sale for them, like what they are buying, is not podcast outsourcing. It is, but their journey doesn't end at the sale, so neither should your sales copy. Yes, you want them to click through, buy, schedule a consultation, whatever that might be, but we need to speak to what happens after.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing those like 3 columns. It's super actionable. I think we can all take that away and just play with that in our own businesses. But this part that you're speaking to now is really interesting. It's like what happens afterwards. And I think that this is where, if I'm following where you're going with this correctly, is where the brand values and kind of mission can come in. Is like, what is like the bigger, higher level outcome that we're helping people achieve? Because to just piggyback off your example is like, yeah, it's getting their podcast outsourced, but is like, well, what does that actually allow for? And that's usually in alignment with kind of like bigger picture, like they have more time to spend with their kids, or that they can have more impact in the world, or whatever their like their bigger aspirations are. So can you tie this a little bit to, I know that's a big part of your work, is like tying in the like mission and values piece to this so that the copy feels really like aligned and meaningful for the person writing it?
Yeah. So assuming that we have a good idea of who we are and what we stand for, I think it's always a good decision to take a couple hours, do a writing workshop, do some co-working with some pals, and really name the mission, vision, values. Now, I have people come to me and say, Sam, I need to put my mission, vision, and values on my website. Where do they go? And it's one of those things, like if I were to walk into a store and they told me we sell luxury handbags, I would almost be hesitant to believe it, because why would I be walking into a store that sells luxury handbags? Wouldn't I need an invitation to come shop at a luxury handbag store, right? Like, why isn't this person wearing gloves like the people I see on TikTok? Like, what if you need to tell me that it's luxury? Why would it be luxury? Like luxury as a word has almost been cheapened. So the same thing goes for your copy on your website. If you need to tell me your mission, but I can't discern your mission from your website, then really we're just using a valuable real estate. However, we can use the language that's in your mission statement. So, for example, mission statements tend to be very brief, right? Really famous one is Tom's shoes. For every pair of shoes you purchase, we'll donate one to a child in need. Great. I think there was a number on it at some point, like it used to be sell 1 million shoes to help 1 million kids or something. But so we can take your mission language and just make it part of your website. Like if you say, my goal is to help 1,000 women find peace after a high control relationship, then your header, rather than here's how to work with me on your website, might become here's how we help women leave high control relationships. So we're using that same language. We're plugging in the language that you know to be true. That is why you're in business, who you are and who you stand for, what you stand for, just becomes part of your website without having to say, we're on a mission to help 100 women kind of thing.
Like it's integrated and embodied in some ways versus it just being like, and that's, I used to work in corporate, and then I did a lot of corporate leadership development, and people would want to do values workshops and like, let's create our values. And then they have this like list of values that they would put up, and they thought that that was going to change everything. And it's like, no, it doesn't do anything. It's
Right.
really in the like operationalization of them and the integration of them that it happens. So I love that you're speaking to that. And so maybe we can touch on like, how do you know when you're looking at or reading copy that it's just like words versus like fully coming from and integrated? What are some of the telltale signs?
I love this question because it is increasingly difficult to sound human in a world that's written by robots. And I am pro leveraging AI, but I believe that AI is a tool and not a writer. That's why I love this question, is because we're sounding more and more stale, I think, just in general. And I don't know if that comes from a fear of standing out, and that's like a mindset thing, which is not my area of expertise, or if it's a we're letting robots do the writing thing, or some combination of the two. So then the question being, how do we then leverage the tools around us, as well as who we are and what we know to be true, to then communicate that without sounding like we're just giving lists? And I think that's thing number one, is don't just give lists. If I see on somebody's website like Kristin values freedom and fun and family, like, cool, but maybe on your about page we see something that actually embodies that, like, when I'm not working, you can find me at Six Flags with my 2 kids. There you go. Like, that's telling me that you value fun and freedom and family because you love taking Fridays off to spend with your family. Okay, cool. Also, we see that in the brand itself. Again, if something is a super fun brand, but they've got all these like boring fonts and everything is black and white, and it's like, we want to see the full brand match up. The final way, and I think this is really, really the key to standing out, is storytelling. We hear all the time, bring your whole self into your business, or be authentic. I value authenticity. And then we're like, what does authenticity mean? I'm a corporate escapee, so I know that I couldn't bring my full self to work in the past. And so then when I heard that, as I entered the online business space and started my company, I was like, I don't know what that means. Do I need to talk about like weird things that I
All the
do
personal
on
things.
weekends?
Yeah,
Like, what do you
exactly.
want to know? I'm an open book, but not that open. What's safe, right? So
Yeah.
I think ultimately it just comes down to telling the stories that you want to tell. If you're going to send
Mm-hmm.
an email to your list about how they can open their mind, some method that you want to teach them, we don't just jump in and say, hello at first name. Today I'm here to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Like, bring a story to it. Say, I was at the beach this weekend, and for the first time in months, I was able to just sit back and relax. And one of the things that I love doing on the beach is kind of digging a little hole and then putting my towel in it and just sitting there and people watching. And as I was people watching, I was thinking about mindset and how when we fully have, and then you launch into your thing about mindset. You tell a story, because the one thing that the robots don't have is all of those stories, all of those analogies. And it doesn't mean that everybody needs to hear about your neighbor's dog growing up and that's why you hate the smell of spaghetti. But sometimes, if you can bring it around pretty quickly, it's relevant, it's human, and it's what somebody else is going to look at and say, oh, wow, this person also values like time freedom and that rest is productive. And they're going to start to align with you in that way. So that was a long answer to
Yeah.
your question, but I think a lot of it comes down to like avoid lists and tell stories.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for bottom lining that for
Yeah.
us. And I think you're kind of touching on something that I think is important here is that there's copy, which we're talking about, some copy best practices, how to have it values driven and mission driven and authentic. But then there's also tying it into a bigger and cohesive messaging strategy. And can you speak a little bit to that and how someone, because I think that that's a challenge that a lot of people have, which makes it challenging to filter which stories are the right stories to tell, how much is too much, like all of these things that become like, I could talk about everything. Like, how do I even know what to talk about? So how do we start to narrow in on a cohesive messaging strategy that is aligned and purposeful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the key to aligning your messaging with your copy is going back to those values and understanding what you mean by those values. Something I love to do when I do messaging workshops with my clients is 2-word values. So, okay, you can tell me that you value creativity. Do you value unbridled creativity? Do you value structured creativity? Do you value creativity for the greater good? really like expand on what that value means to you. Because then when it comes to something that might be difficult to talk about, I'm an American, we're going through a really weird political time right now, and a lot of people are using their business platforms to share what they value so that people know that they're working with an aligned business. And some of it comes off really well, some of it comes off really angry, some of it comes off a little sloppy. I'm not saying anybody's wrong, but it does reflect your brand. So if you can come back to your brand value when you want to share something and when you're questioning, do I share this story? Like you said, what do I share? What do I not share? Come back to that list of brand values. When you've defined that you value unbridled creativity, great. Then maybe this is something that's big and you write something huge that feels a little bit messy because that's aligned with your values. And if it's not aligned, then that's your permission slip to not use your business as the conduit for that story. You can tell that story at dinner.
That's super helpful. And it contains it, right? Otherwise, there's so many things where like we end up giving our audience whiplash. I think sometimes, or I've experienced that from, it's like you're talking about this one day and then this the other day, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's like all over the map versus it being like, I can count on this person for this stuff. And yes, we are like whole multi-dimensional beings that have way more to us than the like 5 pillars in our business and the
Yes.
5 values. But there's also a line there around like how are we using our business platforms? They're not our diaries, they're not our personal blogs. So getting really rooted in those things. And I really like that idea of the 2 word values, because as you shared that example, like what a difference unbridled creativity has and structured creativity, and just how that lands and feels, right, and how that might be
Yeah.
expressed. So I think that's a really cool takeaway, is like not just have these single words that kind of are ambiguous, but add the flavor to them with that descriptor word that comes along with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Like I
cool.
think we can bring our full selves into our businesses, but sometimes we can bring parts of our full selves into our
Mm.
business, and know where those boundaries are is important.
Okay, I have one more question for you before we bring this episode to a wrap. And it's one that I think it's like controversial in the sense that you're going to have people in one camp saying one thing and one camp saying another. So I want to get your take on it. So in order to stand out and to create like a movement, or people who are aligned with you, do you have to be polarizing in your content?
Hmm. It's polarizing to ask a polarizing question.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. What's that quote? If you don't stand for anything, then you stand for nothing, or something like that. But
Hmm.
basically the gist of that quote being that, like, oh, that's it. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not standing up for what you actually believe in, it doesn't have to be a super spicy hot take. You just have to be firm in your beliefs and the way in which you deliver things, and understanding that you know what's right. I think that comes down to boundaries. That polarization
Mm-hmm.
is knowing that what you stand for is what's best for you and what's best for your clients. And if it's not what's best for your clients, then they won't work with you. And that's good. You are becoming aligned when you're being polarizing.
Okay, so you're in the be polarizing camp.
Yeah. Like I said, it doesn't mean you have to
Yeah,
be, super spicy about it. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
understanding who you are and how you serve best.
I agree. I agree. I think it helps people see who their people are. And otherwise, it's like, yeah, okay. And that's where the people, you'll get people are like, yeah, they're great. But there's not this like pull or magnetism
Hmm.
towards a certain person. And that usually to me comes down to that piece, is like not really taking a stand for anything, or playing it safe, or wanting to blend in, or, not stand out, kind of some of those things that you talked to
Yeah.
earlier. And I think a good entry point to that is not everyone's going to feel comfy with the spicy hot takes right off the bat, but looking at those values again and looking at what can you take a stand for within those
Hmm.
pieces. And I think that that can be a really good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
can look like so many different things too. It's not always just this person has different values from me. It can be this person is asking something from me that I don't think pairs well with what I teach or what I do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's good to be very firmly rooted in yourself in that way.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, and these really helpful, practical pieces to integrate into copy. And I love that distinction between copy and content even. So super helpful there. If people want to learn more about you and about your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, the best ways to find me are at nomadcopyagency.com. And I'm on
Great.
Instagram at nomad.copy.
Awesome. And do you have any upcoming offers or workshops or anything like that that you've got
I
going on?
do. They're not until April, but I'm opening the doors to Copy on Demand, which is my membership where people submit copy to me as they're working on it, and I give them tips like the ones that you just heard, but with the context of what they've already written. So I get to know their business over time, and they become better copywriters inside of their business and ultimately selling more. So that'll open the second week of April. The waitlist is open on my website if anybody's interested.
Okay, great. Well, we'll link your website below so people can check that out. And so, yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And to everyone who is listening and sharing in this episode with us, thank you so much. If you love this episode, please hit that follow or subscribe button and consider leaving a review. It really does do wonders for the show. And I'll link all of Sam's information in the show notes. You can connect with her. And as always, if you have any questions or feedback for me, you can reach out to me at Kristin Constable on Instagram. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you in the next episode.